Hey, welcome to Planet Hex. I'm Andrew Horn. This is a show where I talk about pop culture, VHS, comic books, movies, lots of movies, music, the writing life, horror movies, not so horror movies. You get the idea. It's a pop culture sort of thing with an old nerd. I'm Andrew. I'm an author. I live in Nottingham in the UK. I've wrote things like the book VHS Ate My Brain, Bagged and Boarded Life on Planet Geek, the novel A Stolen Fate. I've written for movies. I've written for podcasts and all kinds of stuff. I've also written for lots of comics. I say lots. Well, I've written for Femme Force from AC Comics, Super Babes from AC Comics, Violet Shadow from AC Comics, and also the official Doctor Who adventures, and once in the Judge Dredd magazine, which I would really love to do again. That was a great title, really lovely people to work with. On this episode, I'm going to talk about comics. That's why I mentioned the comics, because there's been a lot going on in the comics world of late, which I'm finding I'm finding it very interesting at the moment. I've been revisiting a lot of comic book websites and the characters that I know and love, and the characters that a lot of people now know and love through things like the MCU, the DC movies, various TV shows and so on, and of course various video games. A lot of things have been brought back into the wider consciousness over the last decade or so, of course because of the 15 years now, with the MCU and the DC movies and such like just being huge and changing the pop culture landscape. But it's done some interesting things to the comics landscape itself as well. So I think that it's hard for the comics scene to get new readers at the moment because a lot of titles are inaccessible. And that's not to say they're badly written or the art is bad or anything like that. There is some incredibly high quality work being done. However, characters that have been made household names through movies and TV shows and games and so on for the last few years, they no longer feel like those characters in the comics. So the source material has changed in a lot of ways to match the success of the movies and things and the other media. However, the movies have moved on, but the comics are still trying to find their feet again. So the perception of a lot of characters starts and ends with the movies that have been made and the TV shows, and so the original source material is left behind. Now there has been a steady decline in comic book sales for a long time. It goes up and down. But like traditional floppy individual issues of comics, they're struggling to find a wider audience of younger readers. Now that's not just because of digital media. I mean, you can read comics online, you can read them on devices, things like Comixology and various other apps where you can read comics, or manga. Manga's still huge. But I think that comics kind of lost their way somewhat, trying to adjust to a new audience. So with digital media, I think comics took a while to get used to digital media. There were some really good ideas along the way, such as in, like, if you buy an issue of a Marvel comic for a while, there would be a sticker you could peel off inside with a digital code, so you could download a copy of that comic and keep. So, or like in a digital library. I thought that was a fantastic idea, because it adds value. Now, one problem with a lot of comics as well is, as well as the characters and the stories no longer being familiar to outside people that haven't been following them constantly, another aspect is the price. Now, I did a review this week on two comics I picked up: Elvira in Monsterland, which was great fun, and Arcade Kings, which is getting some press at the moment. Where is the Arcade Kings piece I was going to bring up? Here it is. So Image Comics Arcade Kings keeps the spirit of arcade fighting games alive. Yeah, it's a good comic. It's a fun comic. The art style is epic. It's a really, really strong art style. I mean, look at this. It's so fun. However, it's $7.99. $7.99. I think it was about £6 from Forbidden Planet. And that is a lot for something that only took about 8 minutes to read. So you can get like a paperback, or you can get movies, or you can get a bunch of Kindle books, or you could from the Nintendo Switch store, you could buy a bunch of indie games for the $7.99. I don't just mean one. I mean you could get like 4 of them. There's a problem with the pricing as well, and that puts a lot of people off. The comics can easily get damaged and so on, and there's also been a greater shift towards reading things in trades, and I totally understand that. So trades, graphic novels, anything like that, that is a much more appealing prospect to a lot of people, because that means you can get the entire story without waiting months, and you can read the whole thing from start to finish, and you can enjoy it on your shelves as part of your collection, that sort of thing. And I totally get that. However, because some people are moving more towards just buying trades or waiting for digital, individual copies, individual issues, the sales are going down. And it's strange to me as a lifetime comics fan, and then as an adult a comic book writer. It's hard to see that these things are fading away, and I do think that within the next few years they're going to go the same way as video rental stores. I know I talk about video rental stores a lot as a point of cultural reference, but that's my thing. So I do worry sometimes that comics aren't branching out enough to bring in new readers. One of the things as well is that a lot of characters are dwelled on. A lot of the same things are going on and on and on with franchise after franchise. So things like Ninja Turtles, and of course things like Batman and Spider-Man, those are the given. Things like Batman, Spider-Man and so on, but things like Transformers, G.I. Joe, Ninja Turtles, as I mentioned, are still getting more and more titles over the years, and that works against it, because there is a dwindling market for those things, because we have seen them constantly since the mid-80s. And they don't belong to this generation. Manga publishers, on the other hand, are doing some great work with things like, My Hero Academia and things like that. There's a lot of stuff going on that is really appealing to that audience, and they get quite a hit from a relatively low outlay. So like the $7.99, £6 that I paid for that, £2 more, you could get a full-length manga book, and you'd get a lot more value out of that, and a lot more enjoyability, readability. It's like Arcade Kings. I don't have a problem with Arcade Kings. I enjoyed it, but it was very expensive for the amount of content that it presented, and that was the issue that I had. There needs to be more value in comics. If you want to charge a premium price, there has to be a premium content. So there has to be plenty of content in there. Not just like great artwork, but a compelling story that doesn't take seconds to read. Get some more dialogue in there, get some more exposition in there. Really get into the characters and the situations, rather than just showing another splash page, full page image of a fight scene. There needs to be more than that. Also, you see here, there's Darkseid is still a big player in the DC universe, and because of the amount of history a lot of these comics titles it's a Blockbuster and Netflix thing, because of the element of history of these things, that can also be off-putting to a younger audience. Like here, Rom has come back. Rom the Space Knight has returned to Marvel Comics. I mean, why? I liked Rom, but it was very much of its time. I know it's come back a couple of times since then, but these things are, the origin of them is getting more and more obscure. Stormwatch is taking the Suicide Squad's place in DC Universe. Stormwatch, started with Image Comics, and then Wildstorm was picked up by DC, and it was integrated into that. But there's a load of lore and backstory there, and people just don't have the time to delve into it anymore. So I am wondering what we will see with the future of comics, especially from the big publishers, because I think smaller publishers, I say smaller, but things like Dynamite and Boom and so on, they're still finding new things to do. Yes, granted, the Elvira comic I got last week was very much aimed at the Elvira audience that knows of Elvira and the history there, but that's a smaller concern than something that's on a par with the X-Men or Avengers characters, or Batman or Superman. Also, like, here's an example here. Thor 34 has redefined the Marvel Universe by changing the origin story of one of the most sinister supervillains in the God of Thunder's latest war. So there's changes to characters that people are familiar with. That's Hela there, and there's Thanos in the background and Thor there. There's stuff going on where it's just going to confuse new readers. It's really hard for people to find what they want, what they're looking for. Let's have a look here. Now, things like Deceased, that's fair enough, because that's like a spin-off from the side, and that does have a lot of appeal. But again, example here on Bleeding Cool, there's a lot of excitement around Marvel Studios' X-Men '97, the cartoon continuation of the '90s X-Men cartoon, and I don't think the X-Men have really had as golden a period as they since the '90s, since the Fury with the multi-million selling issue 1 with Jim Lee artwork and everything like that. They have not had a cultural landmark like that since then. There was the Ultimates universe for Marvel. That did well for a long time in sort of updating things for a younger audience. That was a really good jumping on point for younger fans because it started familiar characters over again. So that was done really well. However, the Ultimates universe is 20 years old now. So that's not for this generation. This generation needs its own Ultimates. That's what it needs. And personally, that was what I would say, a retcon of everything. Start over for a new generation with a new style that appeals to this generation. The Ultimates, it didn't always hit home for me, the Ultimates range, but I was working in a comic store at the time and it sold like mad. On the other hand, you had big event stories like 52, which after a huge start to that story where you're getting an issue each week, it petered off something chronic. After like the first couple of months of it just petered out to nothing. That's in my experience. I know it's seen as a bit of a landmark, but DC tried doing it with the New 52, but that didn't land the same way. It seemed like they were doing it for the sake of it rather than starting things over again like Marvel Ultimates did. Ultimates did it in a really good way, and I think that's something that we need for this generation now. Let's see what else we've got. DC announced a new Dawn of DC timeline, but don't hide anything. So, Dawn of DC, so they're things starting over again. There's still all the crossovers. That's something else that can put new readers off, is crossovers. Large crossover stories that need you to buy title after title after title and piece them together. That can put people off now because they don't have the time or the available budget, especially the available budget at the moment, to go and follow all these things up. Things have changed, unfortunately. Like even here, we've got Storm 1 reminds us that prequels can be good, actually, so that's good. But again, Storm 1, it is a prequel series of a very well-established character, so there's a built-in audience there that are going to pick that up, but it could be so much wider if they were able to tap into a more modern audience's consciousness with some new characters that they deserve to have. This generation needs to have their own Ultimate Marvel range, or New 52, but not terrible. That would be good. There needs to be a way that these things can be built on without losing the core values that made the original so good. But there are some great things going on out there in the comics world, and I do encourage you to check them out, and don't dismiss it for as something that may be forgotten or something that's old-fashioned, because it is still really good. There is some excellent work going on there. If you haven't been a comics reader for a while, do visit your local comic book stores and see what's available. I'm sure you'll find something that sticks out to you. If you don't see anything on the new releases, go and revisit something in the trades. Go and find something that you want to rediscover, or something that you didn't finish when you were a regular comics reader. Support these places, and then they will be able to be the barometer of what people are looking for, and that those sales from those comic stores will help to dictate what gets made further down the line. If you want to know what's going on in the comics scene at the moment, I would wholeheartedly recommend the Comic Geek Speak podcast. Each episode is like 2 hours plus, but a very good listen. I have a great preference for the previews episodes, where they go through a full edition of previews and find out cool stuff that they would like to pick up from each issue. I do thoroughly enjoy that. Also, another one that I listen to all the time is Robservations with Rob Liefeld, who goes through a lot of comic book history and stuff about the business and stuff about how characters came to be, and that's a really good listen as well, from someone that lived through one of comics' golden ages. It's a really interesting show from a really solid creator. I know not everyone's a fan of Rob Liefeld, but I love his work. I think he's great, and his enthusiasm for the genre and for the business shines through in these things. So, in like Marvel's new comics here, we've got Amazing Spider-Man's Ms. Marvel death headlines Marvel new comics. So popular characters are getting killed off and brought back. There's elements from the movies being put into things. The original Nick Fury has now been retconned, or is about to be retconned, from Marvel continuity, so that now it's just the Samuel L. Jackson style Nick Fury from the Ultimates range. So there's like one adventure left for the classic Nick Fury, the one that looked like David Hasselhoff, and funnily enough got played by David Hasselhoff in the 90s Nick Fury movie, if anyone remembers that. That has been retconned as well. So a lot of what the foundation of all these characters that are now loved all over the world by like film fans and TV fans and people that found them in games and such like, their foundations are being forgotten and eroded by constant reboots and constant expansions on them and retconning of our origin stories. Yeah, some of the origin stories weren't great, some of the past of these characters was problematic, but just retconning it makes it incredibly hard for anyone to really pick up what's going on and get the references that are being brought up in stories. So it's an interesting time for comics to see what's going on with these characters. Things are getting replayed over and over and over again. The same franchises keep coming back, and that's the ones that the standard comic book crowd will always go to because that's what's familiar. And new titles are often falling by the wayside, which is a real shame. But anyway, that's my run on comics for this week. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Planet Hex. If you have any thoughts on what we can, how the comics industry could find its feet again and find a new audience that will really connect with this stuff, please do pop it into the comments below. If you like this sort of thing, please do like and subscribe. I do these videos at the weekend, full-length episode Planet Hex at the weekend, where I talk about all kinds of pop culture stuff like tonight. And in the week, I put out reviews out in the Planet Hex review time, little mini episodes, just to keep things ticking over nicely and give me something to do in the evenings that doesn't cost me anything. So that's always good. So please do like and subscribe, and thank you very much for watching this episode of Planet Hex.
The future has already arrived.